Welcome to Wild Ideas Worth Living, a show where we talk to experts who've taken a wild idea and made it a reality so you can too. From people who have sailed around the world to those who've started thriving businesses and even broken records, some of the wildest ideas can lead to the most rewarding adventures. I'm your host, Shelby Stanger, and I hope you enjoy this show. This is episode 49 with outdoor podcaster and thru-hiker, Willow Belden. This episode was brought to you by Traeger grills. Even if you're a veg head like me, wood-fired grills just make food taste better than charcoal or gas. It's kind of like how food tastes better when you camp. They have a 6-in-1 versatility, so you can cook hot and fast or low and slow, allowing you to grill, smoke, bake, roast, braise, and barbecue with one device. Plus, they have digital control, so they're super easy to use, and you can set consistent temperatures and master whatever recipe you're working on. Plus, if you're barbecuing for friends and family, you get to focus on what matters most, which is hanging out and having fun rather than worrying about perfecting or maybe burning your food. This is the grill used by world-class chefs, barbecue masters, and even badass explorers like Kimmy Warner, a guest of this show. You can go to TraegerGrills.com to check them out. They make awesome holiday gifts. That's TRAEGER grills.com. This episode was brought to you by Olokai, a company who puts a ton of time and thought into crafting amazing footwear for men and women. I have a ton of pairs of Olakai's sandals and even some of their slip-ons, and I love their shoes because they're all made really well so they don't break down, and they're all stylish so you can wear them with really nice outfits and always to the beach. Olokai was founded to celebrate the aloha spirit and the waterman lifestyle, and they also aim to do a lot of good. They believe that sustainability and positive living is less about an ethos and more about the choices and actions you make every day. One of the best parts is this company is a certified B Corporation, and they do a ton of giving back to communities. They even have their own Ama Olukai Foundation, a nonprofit that helps to preserve the Hawaiian culture and the Hawaiian spirit, which I'm a big fan of, considering my grandma lived in the islands. You can check them out and buy an awesome pair of sandals or even some slip-ons or one of their new pairs of boots for yourself or a loved one this season at olukai.com. That's OLUKAI, olukai.com. Willow Belden is the host of Out There, an outdoor podcast that captures the big life questions and struggles we all have, but through the lens of the outdoors. A few years ago, Willow left a great job. She was working at Wyoming Public Radio, but she quit to thru-hike the Colorado Trail, which is about 500 miles. We talk about why she did this and what she learned along the way. We also talk about what she's learned from starting a podcast, from interviewing so many great adventurers, why chocolate is so important, and so much more. I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, we're with Willow Belden. Willow, welcome to Wild Ideas.
Thank you so much.
We're stoked to have you. So I think we should just start with your big wild idea. You went to Columbia Journalism School, got a job at Wyoming NPR, which is so cool. And then you had this wild idea to quit an awesome job and go hike the Colorado Trail, which is about 500 miles. Why?
Yeah. So it does sound a little stupid. So I had the job at Wyoming Public Radio was like, that was my dream job. I had been working for a long time to become a public radio reporter. Like that was what I wanted to do, I thought. And it was this job that was on paper really good and even not on paper. Like it was a good job. I loved my colleagues. I had a great boss. I felt like my work was meaningful. It was interesting. It was different every day. But it wasn't making me happy. Like I didn't love it enough to make it worth the amount of stress it was. And so that was part of it, was that I had this idea of like, you know, I heard, you hear people talk about like jumping out of bed in the morning and being excited about what they're going to go do for the day. And I was just like, I want that. And I don't feel like I have that at this job. So, and people would say, well, what would you rather do instead? And I kind of said, well, if I knew what I wanted to do instead, I'd probably already be doing it. So I sort of had this idea like, okay, I feel like I need to just leave everything behind for a little while and think and like have some space to think and hear my own thoughts. And so that was sort of part of it. And then the other part of it was very personal. My mom had passed away a few years earlier, and I had just sort of not taken time to process that. And so that was sort of like the grief was kind of lingering and manifesting itself in health problems. And so I kind of figured I needed to take a little bit of time on that aspect as well. And then I this is probably kind of stereotypical, but I read Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And this is like, if you haven't read it, it's this book where she, like, her mother dies when she's in her 20s, and it like turns her life upside down, and she gets addicted to heroin, and she but then she decides to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail, and she does it, and it like makes her happy again and like gets her life back on track. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm not addicted to heroin, but like maybe I could do something like that too, and get the same kinds of benefits. And so it just kind of, I don't know, it was one of those decisions where just it felt totally viscerally right, even though it didn't seem like a rational thing to do, to like leave this awesome job and with nothing lined up afterwards.
I mean, you're speaking to someone who made a pretty similar decision. I didn't hike the PCT, but I went to Indonesia on a surf trip, and quitting didn't make sense on paper, but it worked out. And I just laugh because in one of your episodes, just so you all know, Willow has a great show called Out There. We're going to be playing some clips from it later on, but someone asked you, did you have any deep thoughts on the trail? And I laughed because you said no. And I'm guessing, did you think that there would be like a parting of the clouds experience on this trail where the answers all flooded in and came to you? And what happened maybe instead?
Yeah, I kind of did think that was going to happen. And it was funny because actually a friend of mine, as I was explaining the plan for this trip ahead of time, a friend of mine said, like, what do you think is going to happen out there? Like, literally, like, do you think the clouds are going to part and you're just going to have all the answers? And I was kind of like, yeah, like, that's what I'm hoping is going to happen. And I had sort of pictured and even if that didn't happen, I had sort of pictured myself like hiking along every day, like through these beautiful places by myself, just like thinking deep thoughts. And that didn't happen at all. Like, it turns out through hiking is really hard. And, I got terrible blisters on my feet, and there were mosquitoes, and it poured, like it rained so much, and there was heat. I mean, it was just like the hike was so hard that it sort of like demanded all of my attention all of the time. And I mean, I don't mean to make it sound like a terrible experience, because there were actually really wonderful parts of it too. But it was just not the kind of thing where you ended up thinking deep thoughts out there. What I found was that the deep thoughts happened after I finished the trail, like once I was already back home. So it did have the effect that I wanted. It just didn't happen while I was out on the trail.
What was the hardest part of the 500 miles?
Probably, well, maybe the that's a good question. What was the hardest part? Blisters? I know that sounds really dumb, but like when your feet are covered in blisters and it's really painful to walk, and walking is just what you have to do all day, every day, and you like don't take rest days, really, it makes it really hard. And the rain, I mean, I was expecting, like, it was Colorado in my mind, you get an afternoon thunderstorm and the rest of the time it's bright and sunny and beautiful, and like that just didn't turn out to be the case. It just like rained a lot. That's really tough when you just like can't dry out your gear and everything's wet and you're like, oh gosh, is my sleeping bag gonna get wet? Like, am I gonna freeze to death at night? Like, I mean, it sounds dramatic, but those are the kinds of things that I was worried about.
I'm really interested in through hiking, and we're going to talk more about this towards the end of this podcast, just the gear you used. And it's so many people are through hiking now. There was another part of one of your talks where you talked about the loss of your mom and your mom who died of cancer. And I'm so sorry to hear about that. I lost a parent young, and I have a friend who just lost a parent to cancer, and a lot of us are just losing parents right now. You talked about how that grief from losing a mom was sort of like carrying a boulder, and maybe after the trail, it became just a little bit more like a smooth pebble, still there. Was there a time on the trail where you just really missed your mom?
I don't think there was a specific moment that I missed her more than other times. It was more of a pervasive thing. There was one moment on the trail that I remember. It was this beautiful spot. I had been hiking along the Continental Divide all day, like up above tree line, just this vast ridge line with mountain peaks in every direction. And then I was hiking down into this ravine canyon kind of thing. And it was just, the whole area was just blanketed with wildflowers. That was one of the positive things about all the rain, is that the wildflowers were gorgeous. And it was just like sunset was gorgeous on all of the mountain peaks, and these flowers were gorgeous. And it was just quiet and beautiful. There was no one else around. And it was just one of those moments where I remember thinking, like, my mom would have absolutely loved this spot. And I just remember thinking, I wish I could show it to her. And, of course I couldn't. She had passed away. But I think if there was one moment on the trail that sort of really stood out in terms of missing her, it was probably there.
Thank you for sharing that. What was the biggest takeaway from it all? The whole 500 miles, and how long did it take you?
So it took about 5 weeks. So I averaged like 100 miles a week, which I guess was pretty typical. I mean, some people did it way faster. I didn't really know ahead of time how long it was going to take me, because I was new to backpacking. Like, I'd never done something like this before. And so I was like, well, I guess it'll take as long as it takes. But so anyway, it took about 5 weeks. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was that you don't have to already know how to do everything ahead of time in order to do something. So I tend to be very sort of a planner and a type A kind of person. Like, okay, and if I don't already know how to do this, like, I guess I better not try, because I might get it wrong and I might fail. And for this trip, like, I didn't know anything about backpacking really ahead of time. I think I had gone backpacking like twice for a night or two before I went on this 5-week trip. And I had never gone by myself. And so, a rational person would probably say, well, maybe you should try like going out for a week or something before you do this. But in my mind, like, no, I wanted to do this trail. And so, since I didn't know anything about backpacking, I read a lot of books, because that's like my go-to. I'm like, oh, I can read books. I can do that. And I talked to people, and I like researched gear blogs obsessively, and, spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this successful. And it was successful. I feel like a lot of people ask me now, like, what would you have done differently next time? Or like, is there gear that you would have brought differently? And for most of it, like, not really. Like, I felt like it was fine. Like, I knew what I needed to know. I knew enough, and it was still hard, but it was hard for everyone, even the people who had done all sorts of thru hikes before. And so that really just kind of showed me, okay, like, it's okay if you don't know how to do everything. Like, sometimes it's worth doing anyway, and like, you'll figure it out. If it's worth doing, you'll figure out a way to do it. So that was one of the biggest takeaways. I would say the other one, and maybe this sounds a little touchy-feely, but like, it reminded me that it is possible to really love life, like to feel like energized and excited, and to be in a place where you're not anxious about your future, and you're just like enjoying being a human, which again, I mean, it sounds kind of touchy-feely, but I had sort of gotten into this rut of being sort of like low level depressed for a long time. And this really snapped me out of it and was like, no, you can like, life can be awesome. You can love it. And that's possible. And I think that was really important to remember.
Isn't that funny that you could be in like massive lightning, thunderstorms, soaking wet and have joy, massive amounts of joy?
I know, right? It sounds so silly, right? There were parts of the trail that were really, truly spectacularly wonderful also. But I think that's one of those things. You just like, yes, there are lots of things that are hard. And you just kind of, after a while, you're like, well, I can't plan it all out ahead of time and figure out all the answers. So like, we'll just keep going and like cross that bridge when we get there. Whatever it is that you're worrying about, it's like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. Somehow we'll figure it out.
So just briefly, when you got back, was there this changed Willow?
Yeah. I mean, I think I came out of this feeling so much more confident and so much more optimistic than I had been in a long time. It felt like, the world was mine for the taking and I could just go do whatever I wanted. And if it was sort of a crazy idea that I had, like, okay, like, go try it. You can do it, maybe. Or at least it's not a bad thing to try. And it's such an intoxicating feeling. Like, it's hard to recreate.
So that's perfect segue, because then you had this wild idea not too long after, I'm guessing, to launch this podcast out there. And you've been doing out there for what, 2.5 years now this year, twice a month. Maybe just briefly tell us, what stories you're attracted to and like to cover on your podcast.
Yeah. So I like to describe the show as exploring big questions through intimate stories in the outdoors. So all of our stories have some tie to the outdoors, but really the bigger focus is each story looks at some broader question, whether that's a psychological question or social or scientific. And we really go deep into these sort of personal narratives and look at what kind of life lessons we can draw from those. I think for a lot of us, and certainly for the Colorado Trail did this for me, I think for a lot of us, we have these experiences outside, and whether that's doing a thru hike or something much smaller, I think a lot of us have these experiences outside that really do help bring us wisdom somehow about life. And so we use these stories to kind of get at those bigger questions. And if that sounds like a little bit abstract, like for instance, we had a story about a guy who goes up Mount Everest, and in this experience, he has to decide whether or not to leave another climber for dead.
Oh,
like this guy who's like on the verge of death, like up in Everest's death zone where there's like no oxygen, whatever. And so the guy has to decide, like, is it worth trying to save this guy when he might die anyway, and when it's putting our team at risk, and will also mean that like we're not going to get to the top if we try to save this guy. So is it worth, like, do we do that? Do we not do that? And we use that story then to look at, like, okay, how do we as humans make moral decisions? Because it turns out that like the decision-making process for something like that is the same decision-making process we use day to day. Like whether if we decide like, are we going to stop and eat that donut even though we're trying to lose weight? Or like, do we put something in the recycling bin even though the trash is closer? Like it's the same decision-making process. So we kind of go into that. And I don't know. Those are the questions. I feel like there's a lot of outdoor journalism out there, but a lot of it tends to focus very much on like, oh, and we had this crazy adventure. Let me tell you about it. And I'm more interested in like, okay, what does that crazy adventure tell us about all of us? And how does that crazy adventure help us make sense out of the world and figure out our place in life? So that's kind of what we're looking for.
So let's just skip ahead and play a quick excerpt from an episode on Willow's show before she tells us her secrets to podcasting, through hiking, and how to quit your job. So this is an episode she did called High on Failure. And Will, if you could just talk us quickly about sort of briefly what we're going to hear, and then I'm going to ask you about failure and kind of what you learned from it after.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a story about an ultra runner named Jordan Wurfsbrock, and she decided several years ago that she was going to do one of the toughest trail running races that exists. It's 550 miles. It's called Infinitus, and it takes place in the mountains of Vermont. And, like I said, Jordan was an ultra runner. She was not new to this, but this was way more extreme than anything she'd done before. And I'm not giving anything away by saying this. So because we say this right at the beginning of the episode. So she fails in this race. Like the race broke her. She does not manage to finish. And so this story kind of looks at, okay, how can failure actually end up being a success for somebody? So anyway, this particular part that we're going to hear, it's at the beginning of the race. She's just gotten directions for the course, which is this sort of figure 8 shape. And so the runners are all going to be doing this course, this figure 8 loop, 20 and a half times.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right.
My plan was to go out easier than easy. Walk as much as I wanted, stay relaxed. And I did. We started out on the upper portion of the figure 8. This 10-mile loop had a steep climb up Mount Romance, then a sweet downhill cruise back to the lodge. When I came through base camp, I felt great. I was in and out onto the lower part of the figure 8. I kept feeling good even as the trail got tougher. This 16-mile section included a slog through a marsh with shoe-sucking mud and a winding ridge-top trail that felt like going around and around in circles. I have to hand it to Vermont. I live in Colorado, where I'm used to running on rugged, high-altitude trails in the Rocky Mountains. So I didn't expect the trails to be that hard. But they were gnarly. Rocks, roots, mud, logs to climb over, ankle-deep fallen leaves on the ground so you couldn't even see your footing. I got lost on my way back and ran a bonus mile or two, but even that didn't dampen my mood. 1 marathon down, 19 and a half to go.
Will, I love, okay, you can tell your background in public radio. It's so good. This is why I love listening to this show. I listen to it often on my drives to LA to see my family. What did this episode teach you about failure?
Well, I think so I tend to be very much like Jordan, where I fear failure. And so for me, it's like, failure is bad. And this goes back to like the question of not wanting to do something unless you already know how to do it. Like, it's like, oh no, I need to succeed at everything I try. That is sort of my general outlook on life. And this story really shows how failure was a good thing for Jordan, because it's sort of like she had spent her whole life sort of banging her head against a wall, like trying to do things that and succeed at things. And when she was forced to fail, it sort of took away that pressure. And so I think it's for people like me, and I bet you're like this too, Shelby.
Oh, I'm like total, like I was just raising my hand, but trying not to talk and just let you talk. But yeah, I mean, I'm a total perfectionist. I hate failure. That's why I started this podcast, because I was so afraid of failure that I was like, well, now I'm going to have to maybe fail every week. And it gets easier. Yeah. And like sometimes I make it, sometimes some of the episodes fall a little shorter, but yeah, I ran cross country growing up. I still run. Tomorrow I have this idea that I'm going to run 20 miles. Have I trained for it? No, but I just want to do it.
Yeah. And so I think for those of us who tend to be like that, it's important to remember that, like, okay, it's all right to fail sometimes. And sometimes it's more than all right. Sometimes it's better to fail. Like sometimes that's actually what we need, and not just to humble us, but like it actually changes your perspective on life and it's going to end up making you happier. So that was a really important lesson for me.
That's a good one. So Willow, you've come to the quick and dirty round of the show. It's kind of what I call it, not the lightning round. It's quick and dirty. Everyone wants to start a podcast. I get emailed 10 times a week. Shelby, come to coffee with me. I'm starting a podcast. Help me. I actually just wrote a blog on it. I love to go to coffee with people, but I just can't drink that much coffee a week. So really quickly,
I can.
what should people know before they start a podcast? What are like 2 things they must know?
Don't do it unless there's nothing else you'd be happy doing. I mean, I hate to sound down on it, but like I also think there are so many podcasts out there. Like everyone wants to start a podcast these days, and it's really hard for, I mean, you know this, I know this. It's really hard to build up an audience and actually get heard. So I feel like it's something that sounds really glamorous. And in reality, it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work that's not just like creating your show. It's a lot of work for marketing yourself and getting into the places that people will hear you and trying to scrape together money to make it all work financially. So I say, I mean, doing out there is, I am so happy doing it, but it's also like, if there were something else, if there was some other job that I think I would be equally happy doing, like I would go do that and I would get a steady paycheck and benefits and like that'd be awesome. So it's not, I feel like it's not the glamorous thing that everybody thinks it is.
I totally think you should.
Sorry if that's a little
You should
down.
try and start a podcast. I disagree. Most people quit after show 7, but I think you could start it. So, because I think it's worth everybody to see what it's like. So if they do start it, what's your gear setup? Like, what are a couple things you use?
So mine's pretty simple. I basically got the same recording kit that we had when I worked at the public radio station, or close to it. I got a really good microphone because I think that's like one of the most important things to get good sound quality. I got a pretty good recorder. You need a pair of headphones, and then you need some sort of editing software so that you can do something with the audio that you record. I use Adobe Audition. I really like it. There's a bunch of different editing software options out there that all work well. My microphone is an Audio Technica. I'm going to forget the number of it, but it's a shotgun mic. It's like one of those like really long, skinny microphones. And it gets really good sound. And it's also like, if I'm recording outside, which I do sometimes for these stories, since the podcast involves the outdoors, it's good at blocking the wind. So you're like hearing the person talking rather than all of the other like wind and traffic and like stuff that's going on outside.
What about backpacking? What are your favorite 3 things in your pack for a thru hike?
Number 1 is definitely chocolate. Like I found that you just need so much chocolate as moral support on the trail. So
I was just speaking to the Girl Scouts, and a guy gave a talk on lightweight backpacking, and people were asking questions, and this little girl raised her hand. I mean, this guy has the lightest weight backpack. Has the record for backpacking with the lightest gear. And she raised her hand and she's like, where do you fit your emergency candy? And it was the funniest question ever, but I guess this is real. So chocolate.
And you need more the longer you're out on the trail. Like the first week I was out, I would have some chocolate like maybe once every other day or something. And by the end of it, it's like, no, I need like 2 chocolate bars a day, like at least like to get through. I don't know. I mean, part of it's that they're really calorie dense and you need that when you're hiking that much. But part of it's also just like chocolate's awesome. So, I mean, like one of the actually it was the last day that I was on the trail and I had run out of water, and the place that like the stream that was supposed to exist where I was going to be able to get more water there like just didn't exist. It was like this muddy swamp of cow shit, and I was like, well, I'm not going to drink that. So, but I had chocolate in my pack, and I was like, all right, well, I don't have any water, but I can eat chocolate, and it just like put this big smile on my face. And I was like, all right, I got this. I can go on. So chocolate, definitely.
What's 2 and 3?
The other thing, and everyone laughs at this, but I hike with an umbrella, and because like if it's raining or hailing or whatever, it's so nice just to have that over you, and you can like open your pack and get stuff out of your pack and not have it all get soaked, and your glasses don't get fogged up. And I know it sounds goofy, but an umbrella is definitely, I do that. I bring that all the time. And I guess the third one, this is probably pretty predictable, but like reading material. I have a Kindle and I just like loaded it up with great novels ahead of time because it's just really nice to curl up in your tent at night and have a good novel and read as long as you want to into the night. So yeah, those would be my 3.
Yeah, that's great. What about books that you love or love to gift or read under your tent?
Yeah, so I would say the one that I probably gift the most is actually Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which we talked about earlier. That was just, and usually I'm not a huge nonfiction person. I usually prefer fiction, but this is one piece of nonfiction that really reads like a novel. So that would probably be the one that I gift the most to people. I think it was life-changing for me. So,
any advice you could give to people who want to do a thru hike?
Yeah, I would say remember to hike your own hike. I think there's a lot of tendency amongst thru hikers that like you have to do everything right and your pack has to be the lightest pack ever and you have to have all the right gear and you have to do 20 miles a day and you have to get up before it's light out and like be on the trail when it's just starting to get light. And like somehow if you don't do all those things, you're doing it wrong. And I just don't think that that's a particularly healthy way to go about it. Like, yes, there are reasons that people do these things, but at the end of the day, you're out there for you. Like thru hiking is a very selfish kind of thing and you're doing it for yourself. And so there's no need to do exactly what everyone else does and like do what the pros do. Like if you want to spend a morning like sitting in your camp and drinking coffee, sit in your camp and drink coffee and enjoy the birdsong and like hike in the afternoon. It's fine. And you'll probably still get to the end. I mean, if you're doing one of the really long trails and you have to do a certain number of miles a day, otherwise you're going to hit winter, like maybe that's a little different. But in general, like don't get caught up in this, like I have to do everything just so.
Love it. Everybody has this like weird, quirky trail name when they're on the trail. I've just learned this. Yep. What was your trail name?
My trail name was Two Piece, and it came about because I don't like being dirty. And so I always hike. I bring a swimsuit along so I can like go wash off in rivers and lakes and things like that. But apparently and I just assumed that everyone did this because like, why wouldn't you? But apparently other hikers don't carry swimsuits. And so it was like day 2 of the Colorado Trail. And I came across these other hikers who I had seen the day before. And they asked if I had a trail name already. And I said, no. And they said, well, we gave you one. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, do tell. And they said, well, we named you Two Piece because you have this ridiculous swimsuit. And
did they just go naked?
I was a little unsure about it. I think they just don't bathe.
Oh, I would just go naked. That's amazing. Well, I like Two Piece.
And I did. I mean, you do go naked sometimes, but like sometimes the streams are like by a trailhead and they're like families and things that, you know, so like sometimes going naked is not like the best option. So anyway, that's how I got my trail name and it stuck. So once somebody names you, you can't really get out of that. So
it's classic. Advice to those who want to attend journalism school. You went to Columbia Journalism School.
I think it's important to remember that journalism school is not college. Like I really loved college because I loved like reading interesting books and talking about big questions and like mulling over life's big questions and society's big questions. And like journalism school is not that. It's very sort of like straightforward. Like this is like, let's get stuff done. So don't expect to love it. Like if you were one of those people that like loved college for the sort of like thought provoking aspect of it, like don't expect to love journalism school because it's not that. It definitely got me the connections I needed and the skills I needed to get the job at Wyoming Public Radio, and launched a lot of people into similar jobs. But was it a fun year? No, like really not. So,
coffee. How do you drink your coffee?
I put milk in it, but no sugar.
Advice to your 15-year-old self if you could go back and tell her one piece of advice.
I think I would tell her not to be such a perfectionist, because this, like, I was always that kid that was like, I must get all A's. And if I don't, like, something is wrong. And I think I would tell her, like, it's okay to get a B. Like, just go out and have a little more fun. Which is ironically probably the same advice I would give to myself now, like, as a 33-year-old. So
I love it. It's like talking to a version of myself right now. Okay, if you could throw any party, what kind of party would you throw? Who's there? What kind of music's playing? What kind of food?
I don't know what kind of music's playing, but I'm not sure that music would be playing at all, because I think my favorite party would be like a backcountry ski trip to a hut in the mountains, or like to a yurt or something. And like we'd have plenty of wine and plenty of snow and a small group of friends who you really get along with and don't mind like being cooped up in a cabin in the woods for several days. And like we would just go and ski and like drink wine.
What is your message to the world if you could fly an eco-friendly plane around the sky and it just said one thing and went over all the trails around the country and maybe even the world? What's your message?
I would say do the thing you love, not just the thing you're good at. Because I feel like a lot of us are good at something and then we get stuck doing that even if we don't really love it. And just because you're good at something doesn't mean that it's the thing that you should be doing in life. You can be happy doing what you're doing. You can love doing what you're doing. So don't get stuck in a rut just because you're good at something.
Willow, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing excerpts of your show with us. Where can we find more of you?
So Out There has a website, obviously. It's outtherepodcast.com. The show is also on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play Music and wherever you get your podcasts. And I would love for people to take a listen, and I'd love to hear what you think. It's always nice to hear from new listeners and hear their suggestions and comments.
Willow, thank you again. Loved having you. We'll put links on some of my favorite shows of Willow's in the show notes, as well as the other one we spoke about, High on Failure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed this show. Thanks to Willow for coming on and sharing your wild ideas. I'll be sharing a clip of one of my episodes and going on Willow's show in a few weeks, so check out There. She releases a new show the first and third Thursday of every month. You can find it wherever you download podcasts, and we'll have links in the show notes. Okay, we want to hear from you. Go to wildideasworthliving.com, email us, or go to our Facebook or Instagram page to submit questions and feedback for the show. We're improving it and making 2018 awesome. We need your feedback now. You can also go to the website, wildideasworthliving.com, click on the Support Us tab, and you can donate. You can help the show out through a strict monetary donation. You can support us by using the Amazon affiliate links, or you can write a review on iTunes. Most of all, you can continue to live wildly, and remember, some of the best adventures often happen when you follow your wildest ideas. We have some awesome guests coming up. Stay tuned. We'll see you next week.